Get 5 coffins ready.
Hey everyone, welcome to my guide for Charon. Charon is the latest Guardian of SMITE and focuses on being really tanky and really annoying. Build-wise on Charon, you can go a few different routes. You can go into the soul lane and do a moderate power to a mostly power build, or go into the support role with a full tank build and one power item. Although you definitely want at least one power item. His damage ability for ability isn't the best, but he's got good range and spams like no tomorrow, so it still works on him. It's still early days for this character, but in my opinion he's definitely more of a soul laner. He can't really fill the role of engage and peel all that well. Relics wise, you can go a myriad of different relics. Shell, Horrific, Blink, Sunder, whatever the current situation calls for, Charon can use it. My personal favorites being the classic Sunder and Horrific Emblem combo, but in exceedingly bad matchups, Beads might not actually be a bad choice. Shard wise is just Horn Shard, although Cloth Shard isn't bad since his full combo comes out pretty quickly. Let's get into a very cool, albeit definitely stolen from League of Legends passive. Every time a friendly minion dies within assist range of Charon, as in the range he needs to be to get the golden XP, a coin will drop, and will remain there for 8 seconds. The minion can die by any means for the coin to drop, and Charon automatically picks up these coins once he gets in range, the range required always being shown by the little AoE around Charon at all times. If Charon is within range to pick up a coin when it drops, he'll automatically pick up the coins. Each coin will grant Charon 1 gold and grant him 1 health point, up to a total of 350 health as seen on the passive bar, but you can keep on picking up the coins throughout the game for some extra money. This is a stellar passive that helps Charon in all aspects and in all roles. It helps him be tanky, helps him stay farmed and support or push leads in the soul lane role. You can't really say no to free gold and health. And obviously, go for the coins whenever you can do so safely. Charon has an ability which lets him get out there and reach the coins that are a little further away, but let's firstly get into his first ability first. Charon shoots forward a projectile which will explode in an AoE when it ends. This projectile goes through minions but stops on walls and gods. When the projectile strikes an enemy god, it will silence and slow them, producing a trail behind them, which slows enemies and deals damage over time. This damage over time affecting the original enemy god as well. Keyword being enemy god, as this ability is noticeably weaker than most abilities of this type as wave clear. The damage against minions is weak, but the damage against enemy gods when you factor in the damage over time is no joke, easily reaching over 400 damage at max rank if you purchased a power item or two, but barely cracking 300 against minions. But that's not really a problem, as with the silence on this ability, gods will be your main target anyways. Now depending on who you're against, you'll either use this every single time it's off cooldown, or you wait for your opponents to make a move before you use it. That's due to the nature of it being a silence, and once you get the timing down, it's an easy one to hit at that. So it's really matchup dependent, largely depending on whether or not you're against channel abilities such as Anubis 1 or Guan Yu 3. In those cases you need to save this ability since Charon doesn't have any other good answers to those abilities. But otherwise, it's open season on your opponents and you can throw it out as often as you like for some damage and a slow to set up for your other abilities. But even in this context, never forget that it is a silence, so it can come out clutch as peel or as a combo starter even though it's not hard lockdown as something like a stun. The silence may not be obvious to follow up off as a stun or a knockup, but a successful silence on an important target can still easily be the key move to break a team fight wide open. So spam it, but be sure to recognize when you need to keep it in reserve to try and open up opportunities on important targets like mages or ADCs. You typically follow this up with your simple but interesting second ability. Charon, after a short windup, deals damage in a small AoE and marks all enemies hit. Marked enemies can be seen through walls and stealth by Charon and his allies, and they have their attack speed reduced by a whopping 30%. And every time an ally, including Charon himself, deals damage to one of these marked enemies, they'll be granted a shield. This can be seen as a win more kind of ability, but there's no denying that it's good at what it's trying to do. Essentially, you want to try and save this ability to use on the enemy ADC, or rather anyone who has a lot of attack speed, because frankly, the ability doesn't do much other than that. The shield portion is reliant on your teammates following up on you, so, asking a lot there. But jokes aside, given this ability's exceptional range, you really do just ignore other gods and plop it on the enemy ADC's head when you're already fighting. Putting the ability on enemy tanks so that your teammates get a shield while they're trying to shred through the enemy frontline is an option too, especially when you're against dive-based supports and especially solo laners. But again, it puts you and the Charon player at a bit of a weird spot because you're putting the ability on the enemy tank hoping that one of your teammates hit them, so it's not really in your control. I also mentioned that Charon can grant himself a shield too, however, and this is the most important part of all this. Moments will come up throughout the game in which you get cornered on Charon or are just trying to escape after making a play, and sometimes it's really just best to 2 your enemies and begin basic attacking them so you get a shield to buy yourself some time so your team can catch back up. And most importantly, you want to maximize on using this shield when you're in the laning phase, as a support but especially as a solo laner. Each team might have a hard time catching back up to you thanks to Charon's third ability. Charon gains exceptionally high movement speed and becomes immune to slows and knockups, but his camera's turning radius is greatly reduced. Charon now has an AoE around him represented by the waves, but Charon himself is also included in this AoE. If enemy gods are hit by this AoE while Charon is casting this ability, they'll be damaged and rooted. And it's important to note that Charon can cancel this ability at any time. This is where Blink and Fast Fingers both come into play while playing Charon. This is Charon's only form of lockdown other than his ultimate, so it's something you need to make count, but at the same time, it's obviously his only form of direct escape other than maybe looking to shield with your second ability or use CC from one of your other abilities for self-heal. So this ability can be pretty difficult to time when you're new to Charon, but really, you just gotta send it with this ability. This is where your matchup and game knowledge are tested the most on this character, knowing when you have an opportunity to dash in with this ability, because while Charon's first two abilities are good for what they are, this is all Charon has outside of his ultimate to truly stop targets in their tracks and peel for as well as set up for his teammates. Being immune to knockups and slows is great, but roots, stuns, taunts, silences, they're all big problems for Charon, so you really need to read the situation as early as the God Select screens to know what abilities need to be down for you to use this ability and not be immediately exploded for it. This is also where the judgment call of purchasing Blink comes into play. There's going to be plenty of scenarios where it's actually just totally fine to row your way into the enemy backline, because your immunities are enough to get things going, but other times, you really need to rely on Blink rowing to get your plays started. This is typically when the enemy team has one or more non-knockups that they can just hold on to in case you row your way in. Yes, that is the case for a lot of scenarios, but while playing Charon for this video, I was surprised at just how many abilities this ability says no to, so don't be afraid to just get in there. Speaking of which, this is another reason why Charon is more of a solo laner. You want your support to have the high big impact engage, and then you follow up with this ability to lock down targets and prevent escapes. But when it comes up to following up on your teammate's CC, this ability pales in comparison to Charon's ultimate. Charon becomes CC immune and winds up. He is able to move his camera around but has his movement speed reduced. After 1.5 seconds he unleashes the wave, which is very wide indeed but travels slowly. The wave will travel through the entirety of the map, and enemies hit by the wave will be feared for up to 1.2 seconds, scaling with levels. Then, any allied gods who get hit by the wave will have their protections increased, and allied gods behind the wave will gain movement speed. So despite the huge impact this ultimate can have, it's actually very easy to use, since 9 out of 10 times, the optimal usage is just, when a fight starts, use the ultimate and try to cover as many enemies as possible with it. Don't get me wrong, it's still a great finishing move if your teammates do a lot of the heavy lifting in the fight, so never forget to use it as chase down on low enemies thanks to not only the damage and CC, but the movement speed you get from the wave behind it. It's just far better to use this for maximum disruption before you even get to the point where you're chasing people down. But with Charon's 1, 3, and to a lesser extent his 2, he's got plenty of chase down and range already. No need to keep the ultimate in reserve just for the option of chasing. There are several details and niche use cases to keep in mind though. First off, it has insane range, but Charon doesn't really have strong lockdown other than his ultimate. You may wonder, is it best to use it early on in fights or try to save it for later on in the fight to finish off targets as they run away? In my experience, it's best just to use this ability as early as possible for maximum effectiveness. Don't get me wrong, I don't mean you should just throw it out every time it comes off cooldown, but you really want to use this ability as soon as the fight breaks out. And remember, you can use Blink and or your third ability to position yourself better with the ultimate. As I mentioned earlier, try to engulf as many targets as possible. And for the record, the protection boost on your allies is nice, but you should really only target allies if they happen to be easy to include. Otherwise, just go all out trying to hit as many enemies as possible. As for how close you want to be to the enemy team, you do want to get nice and close before you start casting the ability. The wave goes through the entire map. Cool, but it is slow, as is your initial windup of the ultimate. Now to be honest, Charon is so tanky that even after getting him up to Mastery 5, I still haven't died while charging up the ultimate. So again, get in there. Whether it's with your Blink, your 3, or both, the deeper you can get to the enemy backline with this ultimate, the better it gets. Never forget that you have an entire millennium to aim the wave too, so don't just start casting and think about what you're going to have for dinner. Always be on the lookout for better spots to place the ultimate, even when you're just moments away from casting it. Speaking of which, how do you want to aim it? Go head on against targets or try to lead it a bit to account for any movement abilities? My recommendation is, unless you need to single out a very important target such as a fed hypercarry like a hunter, mage, or assassin, just try to lay the AoE over as many enemies as possible. Carries, tanks, all of them. Just get as much disruption going as possible. Again, so long as there isn't one single target that you really need to lock down and burn their movement abilities and or relics. And that last part is the main reason you just want to lay this down over any enemy god you see. In most situations where I've gotten good Charon ults off, a lot of enemies just take the damage in fear rather than try to leap away or dash from it. Will they use beads on it? For sure, but in most situations, trying to avoid this ability as a mage, ADC, or assassin is extremely difficult since it literally has infinite range, so you have to dash or leap to the side of the wave, which is almost always worse than just eating the damage and the fear. Then they leap or dash away, giving your team more time to follow up with you. Now finally, it goes all the way across the map, but is it ever worth it to use it at extremely long ranges, or at the very least, across the length of a lane or so? Well, kinda? This is a possibility for the ultimate, but it should never be your main usage of it. Use it at very long ranges when you know it will have an impact, as this very important ability for Charon has a huge 110 second cooldown. This is good in situations like fights in the mid lane where you can just shoot the ultimate through it, or fights on things like Gold Fury or Fire Giant, but keep in mind this is a huge risk. Make sure it's going to make an impact before you cast it. Speaking of casting, let's get to some combos with Charon. 1, 3, 2. Two, 3, 1. Blink 3, 1, 2. Blink 3, ult 1, 2. Blink ult 3, 1, 2. Ult 3, 1, 2. Ult 2, 3, 1. Also, they gave Charon ranged basic attacks for some reason, so make sure you're making the most of your basic attacks during combos and use them as poke in the laning phase whenever you can. For ability leveling, you want your 1 at level 1, your 2 at level 2, and your 3 at level 3. From there you max your 1, your 2, then your 3. Leveling the ultimate whenever you can, although I see plenty of people put 1 level into the ultimate at level 5, but skip leveling it so they can focus on the rest of their abilities, which is totally fair since the ult doesn't do that much damage, and while the fear gets longer while the ability gets levels, it is heavily affected by DR anyways, so But really, you can go either way and you're going to feel absolutely fine. And how could you not with Charon? He's got good damage, decent CC, but most of all range. You may look at Charon's abilities on paper and feel like he sounds kinda mid, but then you remember that everything he does has exceptional range and he's tanky, and it becomes a much bigger problem. He doesn't really have that one big ability that locks down enemies or saves an ally's lives definitively, but he has constant harass and ways to stop enemies from even playing the game through his silence and root, and once the opportunity arises, he can disrupt the entire enemy team with one ability in that ultimate. That's where a few issues do crop up though. If you really need to lock someone down as Charon, he doesn't have tools such as an Emir or Emoji Wall to truly stop hypercarries from murdering his team to death. Nor does he have tools like Terrastun or Ganesh Ultimate to directly peel for his teammates. In order to peel and engage for his teammates, Charon needs to put himself in harm's way and not even be as effective at it as those other Guardians I mentioned and other ones too. And as I mentioned before, DR is a legit problem for him. Using 3, 1, and then going into your ultimate results in the fear lasting almost no time at all. So you have to be really careful about piecing your combos together in late game situations where it's imperative you get a good ult off. That said though, he's an absolute blast to play in the solo lane, so as long as you got another tank in your team who can take on the task of engaging and peeling, he'll be a non-stop thorn in the side of the enemy team, and a damn near impossible one to kill at that, if they can even catch you. That's all I have on Charon for now. Thanks for watching.